So I have my Zentangle that we'll be using. And again, you could draw your 4 5/8 circle inside of your journal or a random piece of paper. It doesn't matter. And we're going to start with our string. And we could be very particular with this, but we're going to allow ourselves grace and we're going to dig right in with our free hand and string up with just our hands. So we're going to aura about 1/4 inch away from the tile's edge, just echoing that edge ever so lightly with that pencil because it's just a string that's going to fall to the background, yeah? Just defining that inner space. And then once we have that outer edge defined, I'm going to go ahead and very thinly inside that line offer an aura. So I'm just going to thinly aura that string line that I've just created. Turning that tile so you're making your tile work for you, not against you. Redefining ever so slightly on the line prior to pulling off to get that smooth connection. Makes the string line or any line look more connected and less welded or pieced together. Right. So now that we have this center section defined, we're going to add a dot in the center-ish of that space. So no, we're not getting a ruler out and measuring that perfect center. We're going to offer ourselves grace and again, just find that center and roll with it. And once we've determined what that center is for us in the moment, we're going to offer an orb in the center of our tile, right around that dot, about the size of a nickel. On the outside of this circle or orb in the center, we're going to divide this into quarters. So 12, 6, 3, and 9. I'm going to add little hash marks in there. And then I'm going to divide those quarters in half again. So I'm going to have 8 spaces around that center orb. And now we're all strung up. So I'm going to go to my ink. And inside of this orb, I'm going to lay a grid, and I'm going to lay that grid to kind of follow the arch of the side of my orb. So I'm just going to start laying a grid with my grid not being defined as straight lines, but rather kind of mimicking the arch of one side of my orb. And when I'm done laying my first set of lines for that grid, I'm going to turn my tile so that my small last section is on the left side. And I'm going to use the beginning of that ink line as the start to divide the opposite direction. So in essence, I'm creating a grid using arched lines, not straight lines. And inside of this space, I'm going to offer Knight's Bridge. So just taking our time, inking in every other square or diamond as the case may be, right? And allowing yourself the process of being deliberate and intentional with that ink, which allows us that crisp, clean, velvety black fill. If you're getting those scratchy, hurried white lines, slow down. If you feel like you're going slow enough, ease up on that pen and stop suffocating that ink, right? So once you get that first box done, that's going to be the indicator for every box afterwards. So you're going to go corner to corner as you ink the remaining boxes, not side to side, but rather corner to corner. Getting that checkerboard, every other black-white effect. And you'll see I'm adding little highlights in mine, totally not necessary. You can ink all of those in properly. It's just a personal choice to add that little highlight. Taking your time, enjoying the process, not rushing the process. Just a few short boxes into our expression, we may already start to feel that breath slow, that heartbeat calm. The magic in that repetition, right? So once we have that center orb all inked in and our Knight's Bridge has a voice in that space, we're going to go to this outside edge where we've already um, divided that center orb, and we're going to place almost these kind of tuck behind orbs into each one of these spaces. So I'm going to use my hash marks to determine how wide my orb is going to be. And I'm just going to tuck this orb. So I'm cutting off, I'm not going all the way around, right? I'm just going to use my go behind and tuck these orbs all the way around that center orb. Just resting these pea-sized orbs into that, nestled right into that space that we've defined. So inside of these orbs, we're going to add a little tangulation of the tangle Tardigo. So Cardigo is by Carmen, I'm not sure I'm going to say this right, by Carmen Menchon. And we're going to take a little bit of her deconstruction and focus only on these center little peas using just a portion of that tangle. So each one of these orbs, I'm going to divide with a rice shape. So from the center to each side, I'm going to add a rice shape to those pea-sized orbs all the way around. So just adding the other side of the rice shape to define both the left and right of each one of those orbs. And then in the peak that we've now created with those rice shapes coming together, I'm going to divide that space with 2 lines that come right out of the peak. And then once I've divided that space, I'm going to round off the edges and create almost this fan-like effect underneath each one of those peaks. So dividing that space right out from the center of that peak with 2 lines, and then rounding and connecting those lines at the base. If you have any interstices showing between those orbs, you can go ahead and ink those in just to clean up that internal space where it connects to our Knight's Bridge, yeah? So now I have an opportunity to share my new tangle with you. And I'm pretty thrilled about it because, first of all, I'm not going to get it published. I'm just going to call this my new tangle. But the fact that it grows out of gratitude, I just hope that when it's used, gratitude is felt. Yeah. So here we go. Here's my new tangle. It's called GratiPetalz. So we're going to add GratiPetalz all the way around the outside of this, from the center of this orb to the center of this orb, right? So we're always going to be going center to center. So I'm going to start with my petal and arching up to the top. So I'm creating that left side of the petal. I'm coming down, creating the right side of the petal. And when I come around, I'm going to swirl back in upon itself. and I'm going to create a spiral. So I'm going to squeeze what's going to start as a print tomp in here. But as I round my third, when I round my third spiral, I'm going to cut short and add a closure. So in case you don't know, this is the symbol for gratitude. So we're tucking gratitude inside of each petal. So let me do it again. So I'm going to go from center to center, and I'm going to add a petal that goes all the way to our string line. And when I close that petal off, I'm going to wrap around the bottom and create a spiral. When I get to my third revolution of that spiral, I'm going to cut it short and connect to the spiral inside. So you're in essence creating a small G. Do you see? Gratitude, that small G. So I'm just going to do this all the way around, wrapping back, creating that spiral, stopping. It's the first two steps of my GratiPetalz. And then in each peak of those petals, we're going to offer this wrap. So think betweed. I'm going to redefine the left side and arch across. I'm going to redefine the right side and arch across to get that little weave at the top of each petal. And now the details. So the gratitude symbol always has 3 dots to know that there's always more to be thankful for, always more that you don't see, and always an opportunity to see more. So there's 3 diminishing dots that happen on the left side of that G, or that gratitude symbol. And then while I'm here, I'm just going to offer that line weight to that little weave or betweed little section that happens at the top. And then in that gratitude, I'm going to tether an aura and ink in that space to create that line weight on both of the left sides of those rings. So there it is, GratiPetalz. Ooh, ah, yeah. As you finish that up, I'm going to go underneath where those petals lie on my orbs. And I'm just going to offer some grounding or some ink into those interstices and weld these petals right onto that cardigo. So just adding some ink into the spaces, grounding those petals into that space. I'm choosing to round across my petals, even if my um, my spiral doesn't connect across that valley, just to add a little connection to it, but that's just a personal choice, right? However you see these petals grounding into this space. It's definitely a moment to be able to pause and change that perspective, hold that tile out at arm's length as you finish this grounding up and ooh, ah, yeah. I should see smiles crossing those faces. Yeah. And that tension that we hold in our face as we tangle so intently just melt away. Yeah. So, for any of you that know me, know that there's still a lot of white space on this tile, and it just cannot be. So, we're going to go ahead and aura in between each one of these petals. So, I'm going to aura thinly both the left and the right side of each valley. But I'm not going to aura up over top of the petal, meaning I'm going to stop when I get to my string line. Okay, so I'm just going to aura alongside each of those petals, stopping at the string line, meaning not going to the peak of the petal, just to the side, creating this channel. Now that we've created these channels around each one of those petals, we're going to go ahead and offer some ink. And notice I'm not changing out my pen. I still have an '01 in my hand. I know that some of you are going to reach for that '05 or that '08. I get it. But I believe that inking the drama is as important as doing the line work. And it's all about the process. So the same slow, deliberate strokes with your '01 will fill in that channel one stroke at a time, so beautifully and velvety, while allowing you the opportunity to escape. Just get lost in the mindfulness of this inking. And every now and again, I'm going to remind you to blink so that you're not so lost, you're fuzzy, right? It's a real thing, I know. So we want that real crisp, velvety black fill, not that scratchy, hurried fill, but rather that real slow, deliberate stroke, allowing that ink to just flow so beautifully out of that teeny tiny nib, filling that space. You're going slow and still getting those scratchy white marks. Ease up on that pressure. You're suffocating that ink from flowing out of the end of the pen, right? Might be a really great time to blink and offer yourself a breath. As you round the corner to the end, don't start rushing. Take your time. Make those last petals as velvety as your first petals. So we're going to head into this ring that we've created in our string. And we're just going to lay a row of perfs in there. So super small orbs that fill that space from top to bottom, lining up that channel with these small little orbs, tucking them as close together as possible. And inevitably, we're going to go back in and ink in those interstices to create a channel for them. So if you usually do that as you go through the process, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, we're just adding those orbs inside of that channel, and then we'll go back in and ink in between the interstices to define that channel a bit more. So that's what I mean, right? So if you want to do that along the way, I tend to like to lay all of my orbs down first. But again, once those perfs are all laid down, just going between those interstices, inking in to create a more solid channel. You could keep that kind of open perf and not channel it if you like that look better as well. Always an option. All right. So we're going to head into the valleys of these petals now. And in doing so, I'm going to go ahead and just like we offered down here into the peaks, we're adding just this line work that we're rounding off. We're going to do much the same thing in these peaks around the outer edge as well. So I'm going to start in the peak. I'm going to pull out and aura both sides. So I'm going to tether aura because I'm always starting in that center peak, right? So I'm going to pull around and aura, tether aura, and then pull up the center. And once I've divided that space, I'm going to round off each of those lines to create this fan. And then behind that fan, I'm going to add ink. So all of those perfs and into that now fan is going to get ink. So I'm dividing the space with 3 tethered auras to the, well, 1 to the left, 1 to the right, and 1 up the center. I'm rounding off those lines to create this fan type shape or expression. And then I'm inking in where I've rounded. So here's what we're looking at-ish, right? So again, I'm gonna tether aura to the left, tether aura to the right, and up the center. Once I've divided that space, I'm gonna round each of those lines to create this fan. It's almost like stacked flux, right? When we get the end result. But we're achieving it in a completely different way. I should definitely be hearing the oohs and ahs through the mute button, right? Changing that perspective, holding that tile out at arm's length. Yeah. Offering yourself a smile and maybe even stretching those fingers. Yeah. Our inking is done. So if you're done, go ahead and find what you're going to call the top of your tile. And I know it's a round tile, but still one side or one twist is going to speak louder than any others, right? So find that top so that when you offer your shading, um, you're shading in the quote unquote correct direction. Although, as we well know, there is no right or wrong, right? But um, if we want it all to focus our shading in a direction, just know what direction your tile is going to be. All right. So I'm going to start right in the center of our knight's bridge here with shading. And let me just preface this by saying, right, shading is such a personal thing. So you do you. If I ask you to go really dark and bold and you're a more subtle shader, tone it back and do what speaks to you. If I tell you to shade on the left and you want to shade on the right, do it. Listen to that creative voice, right? All right. So I'm going to start right here in the center, and I'm using my Blackwing mat just because I can, and it's my favorite shading tool ever. Um, but whatever you're using is totally perfect. So in a circular motion, I'm going to lay my graphite on the left side of this center orb. And notice I am laying quite a thick layer of this shading down all the way on the left-hand side. And then I'm going to lighten my pressure and just ever so slightly offer a palette of graphite off to the right. So I have this deep dark graphite that is almost a crescent moon on that left side, and just ever so slightly bringing that graphite up on the right-hand side. And then I'm going to take my tortillon and I'm going to soften that real thick palette on that left side. And I'm just going to circular motion kind of right on top of it. I don't want to pull it too far that I lose my white center. I'm just softening it right where it is, again, in that circular motion. And then I'm going to come over across that right side and I'm going to dab. I'm not going to circular motion, I'm going to dab so that I have a bit more control as to where that shading is going to lay and soften and define. So I have this beautiful highlight, that beautiful white center without taking too much of that right side away with my graphite. Now, with the amount of graphite I laid on the left side, if I went circular motion, I could literally color this whole thing in and have equally as dark of a palette all the way across. It could very quickly get away from you. So that's why I'm saying circular motion right on top, just to soften that out, still allowing that white expression in the center. All right. So now I'm going to move to these Cartigo expressions or tangulations right here along the outside. And I'm going to focus on the rice shape. And I'm just going to add that graphite right to the inner rice shape of that orb. So just along, I'm going to call it like that curtain, right? Where that curtain pulls back into that fan. Keeping that graphite pretty tight against that line. And once I've laid that graphite. I'm going to take my tortillon and right down that line, again, circular motion. I'm going to pull it away, but allow it to still have that white rounded top. So I'm going to pull it slightly away from that tight center line, but I'm not going to color that whole shape. I still want my dark ink, my medium shading, and that white tile to still have a voice. That's the beauty of shading. All three tones having that voice coming together to form the whole voice of the tile. Yeah. No one should be silenced. That white still needs to be seen. And then just with my dirty tortillon, I'm not adding any more graphite into that mix. I'm ever so slightly going to pull down between those rice shapes and just grab the pinch of that fan down below. Again, I've not added any more graphite. There's enough on this little space and my tortillon to take care of that pinch. So now in those GratiPetalz, I'm going to add some graphite to the left side of each petal. So again, adding that graphite right along that ink line of the left side of that petal. And before I soften that out, I'm going to go to this little bead tweed section, and I'm going to lay graphite right where that weave goes behind. So on the right side where that weave goes behind that top weave, I'm going to add some graphite there. And then right in the pinch of where the right weave comes off that left side. So that left pinch of that weave, I'm going to add some graphite in there. So again, right at the top of the weave on the right and the left side of that right weave. Or I guess I should say the weave that goes to the right, not the right weave. So right underneath the top on the right side and the pinch where that weave goes to the right. And once I have all of that done, I'm going to start with that left side of my GratiPetal all the way up and circular motion, just going to soften that to about maybe the third mark of that petal. So I don't want to carry it again all the way across. It still needs that definition of those three tones playing together. So just circular motion, softening in that and pulling it into not the center, but maybe third of that petal. And then once I get into those weaves, I'm going to hold my tile upside down and I'm going to push that in the weave that goes underneath the top, and I'm going to push it down. So I'm just going to push my tortillon forward so that weave looks like it's tucked and has just a shadow where that tuck kind of comes together. And then, of course, in that pinch, I'm going to start at the pinch and just pull forward. Once again, just allowing that graphite to ever so slightly pull forward up into that growing space where it kind of expands outwards. So just pulling it forward. The depth of that shading is right in the pinch. That's exactly where we want it. And it just kind of softens and creates this smoky haze as the space expands. Inside of these fans along the outside, I'm going to add graphite directly to each of those divider lines. Once I've laid graphite into those divider lines, I'm going to pull up and round, pull up and round. So I'm going to use that line to define the roundness inside of the poof at the top of that fan, right? So I'm going to soften by going right over top of my pencil or my graphite, right, to soften out and haze out that sharp line. But then as I bring it up, I'm going to circular motion right into the head or that fullness of that fan. You'll get that deep, dark line right on your ink line. That will stay that real dark shade, but we're going to just soften that and pull it to also add some softness into that top. So if we look at where we are right now, we have our white spots, our highlights in the center, our highlights right around those fans of that inner orb. And then we have those tones of white, soft grays and darks around our GratiPetalz and our fans around the outside. What's probably jumping out at you is this bright white edge. Ugh. So right now, all of this beauty is kind of floating around the center of this bright white tile, and it's not grounded at all. So if we just take our graphite right around the edge of that whole masterpiece that we've just created, we'll give it a home. We'll ground it into that tile and make it look like it belongs. So I'm just offering, again, I'm going pretty deep, but again, I am a really dark shader. So you do you in that whatever speaks to you, or not at all. Maybe that white isn't even bothering you. Maybe you don't think it needs to be grounded at all, in which case, don't do it. But once you've added that graphite, if you've gone that direction, you should immediately, before anything happens to that graphite, you should see that whole center pick up and pop off of that tile. Yeah? It almost has a universal whole unit voice now, whereas each individual element no longer speaks louder than the other. The whole, I'll call it a medallion in the inside, is now one unit, and it is home. You can choose to let that graphite real deep and dark, or you can take your tortillon and soften it. And to soften this, I'm just going back and forth over top of that graphite. I'm not really pulling it. I don't want to circular motion it and pull it off of the tile, because I still do want that tile to have that white edge. I just don't want it to be so harsh. So by doing that graphite again right around that edge, we've now defined a frame. We've now defined a grounding to this whole piece. And we should definitely be holding this tile out at arm's length as we finish these details. Offer yourself a smile. Ooh, ah. And don't forget to offer yourself gratitude and appreciation by signing your masterpiece, the process that took you to get here, offering yourself your time, your heart. Much gratitude for all of you showing up, offering yourself this creative space today, and sharing your time with me. Gratitude beyond words. Thank you so much.